Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Week Was. I'm Saeed Khan, and I'm joined by another powerhouse group, our usuals here. Nancy always gets anything to avoid using the word iconic with her, so new stuff. All right. With us here from Deadline Detroit, we have Nancy Derringer.
Hey.
We have stalwart attorney Steve Fishman.
Yo.
We have former mayoral chief of staff and now principal over at Moment Strategies, public relations strategist extraordinaire Alexis Wiley, and completely recovered Alan Langle, the editor-in-chief of Deadline Detroit. He's completely recovered from being editor-in-chief of Deadline Detroit.
Yes, well, no, I don't think I'll get over that one.
It's like, what's going on? What's wrong?
Over Nacho Grande, Alan?
I had COVID.
Over Nacho Grande.
But now,
Hey, Alexis.
Glad you're better. Can you hear me?
Alexis, when you talk, your earbuds are like buzzing like crazy. Do you have hardwired headphones you can use?
Yeah,
Something's going on there.
Hello.
Maybe reconnecting.
All right.
2 seconds.
Maybe
Okay.
reconnecting the
right.
AirPods.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think
Okay.
it's because Nancy Kaffer had that problem a few
All right.
months back. But anyway,
You are chronicling all the AV issues we have, Nancy. This is going in the anthology.
You know, we ask people to give us their time to listen to what we have to say. The least we could do is not blow their eardrums out, or make them look at.
Yep. Yeah. There we go.
Better.
No, that's
Make them
better.
look
Yep.
at Leon
All right.
Weiss's ear, which was last week.
Yeah.
Well, that's because this show goes to an 11.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're going to actually start on the other side of Le Pond. We're going to look at France, which recently had an election. Their election is really interesting. It's a two-part election process, which takes place on 2 non-consecutive Sundays, separated by 2 weeks apart. And Emmanuel Macron, sort of a centrist candidate, the incumbent, won re-election against what was seen as a rather precarious campaign led by far-right individual Marine Le Pen. In America, we consider a landslide to be anything that's over 5 percentage points. And in this case, Macron won by about 17 points. But is this really a victory, or is this something that is too close for comfort? Le Pen is still lurking around. And what does it really say then about the far right-wing populism, especially as it pertains to us here in the United States?
I think it's disturbing to see any amount of votes for somebody like that. I mean, it's a vote for fascism. I think there were a lot of people dissatisfied with both candidates, but they saw her as so scary that they didn't want to go down there. But it's like, talk about scary. How many votes Donald Trump got in 2020? It was really, I think a lot of people thought like, okay, enough of this craziness. And so many people were like, no, we want more craziness. So
Bring back the mean tweets. Yeah. I don't know. He won, but by a narrower margin than he beat her by the last time. And so the kind of discussion that keeps panels like this on CNN and so forth alive, love to slice and dice that particular result, a million different ways. But, it's like Alan said, it's kind of disturbing that anybody votes for somebody who's, all states right out front. They want to have a closer relationship with Vladimir Putin. France and Russia, come on. I can see the oligarchs vacationing in Paris, but beyond that, I don't know.
Well, now, to be fair, I mean, according to Tolstoy, Russia beat France in War and Peace, so maybe this was an attempt to redeem themselves, don't you think? Alexis, I mean, one thing that Le Pen did in the near the end there is she started to put on a bit of a charm offensive. Her PR crew certainly made her seem like a softer fascist. And at the same time, Macron started to double down on being more to the right. In fact, he lost a lot of the far left, people like Mélenchon and some of the people who didn't make it to the second round, despite Mélenchon urging his base to vote for Macron because they weren't going to vote for Le Pen. 29% of the French electorate stayed home. they saw neither candidate really to be vote worthy. Do you think that charm offensives are something that we're going to see rolled out here in 2022 and 24?
I think you will. I mean, really, what you're going to see, I mean, any smart campaign is based on polling, right? So you're going to take the research and it's going to tell you what you need to do. And oftentimes what you see is like people kind of start off a little bit more authentic of who they are. And then as they keep getting more and more numbers, they start to kind of pivot. I think you're going to see more of that. I think any smart campaign now is like there's so much data out there. There's so much ability to micro-target and know exactly what people are thinking. And you're going to see more of that. I think that, it's clear that the people are starting to kind of, I think there's a lot of anger out there. There are a lot of people who are just, trying to kind of go in that direction. And it's so scary. I think you're going to see another candidate who's kind of going to be in between both of them, who's going to start to emerge as for the next go round.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, Steve, here you saw in the case of Le Pen, she was rightly bashed by Macron for being too close to Putin. Here in the United States, there was a lot of people on the right who were pretty full-throated in their support for Putin, and they've kind of gone silent of late. I mean, do you think that's just sort of strategy to keep their powder dry?
Well, I think a couple of things. With respect to Macron, the most interesting stuff that I read, and I always say this, you guys are the political people. I'm not a political person. But what I read was scary a little bit because, as you guys have already said, the percentage of vote that she got this time as opposed to the last time increased a lot. The second thing that I saw, it looked like Macron was acknowledging, at least, that he is viewed by many as the party of the as the candidate of the rich, and he was going to try to do something about that. And then the third thing that I saw, which of course always seems to come up, is immigration again. And, a lot of these people are just voting anti-immigrant. And I don't know what you do about that. Alexis is way more skilled at that kind of stuff than I am. But that's a difficult thing even to poll for, because I don't know that everybody's going to say that to a pollster that, I can't stand Africans or I hate Jews or whoever it is that's coming to their country. So to me, all those things coming together were fascinating. I think the answer to your question, Saeed, is that it's kind of like, again, what Alexis was saying. These politicians might start out with a position that they actually believe in, but then they do this and they go, and then they listen to their pollsters and they say, oh shit, I've been complimenting this motherfucker and everybody hates him. So I think I better stop it. So what they do is they stand mute, as the defense lawyers advise the clients to do. They don't say one thing and they don't say the other thing. They stand mute. And I don't know that means anybody's changed their opinion, but I think that that's consistent with what the political people are telling them. And most of them don't have any principles anyway. So they just stand mute, and that's it.
Sure. Alan.
I was going to say, any time, I mean, you have an election year where we have a scary war in Ukraine going on. People are frightened by that. You still have COVID, you have inflation, you have issues of natural resources. People, when they're dissatisfied, they look for the opposite of what's happening, and that may have been some of the reasons why she did better than she did last time. I think people are just, whoever's in power and things aren't going great, they're looking for a quick fix. And so,
it's interesting to me to kind of see the way these forces that are shaping politics in this country appear to be doing the same thing overseas. I mean, he's the candidate of the rich argument is basically the same type of populism that we're dealing with in this country. And what's driving it? The fact that economically, we have changed our economy from one where pretty much anybody could get a decent job to one where only a few people can get a decent job, and it requires higher education. And that job is more likely to be located in a large city, which sends more people into cities, which drives the cost of housing up. And, it always amazes me when we drive, to northern Michigan, say, and if we don't take a freeway, sometimes we'll take like a back road and go through some of these little towns and just realize these people are living in a whole different place than I am. And I think that's probably true in France too, and all over Europe, and Europe has more policy and structure in place with the EU to try to preserve kind of that countryside, that gives Europe so much of its charm, but it's still going away. And it's really hard to live in a small city or a small town in anywhere in Europe now. I was just reading a few weeks ago about the $1 houses in Sicily. You can buy a house for $1, just like you can homestead something like that in Detroit or other cities. But it's a little house in an interior village that just doesn't exist anymore. And it's sad. Alan's right. People are looking for a solution to that, and they don't necessarily have it. Before we move on, can I say one thing, though? Saeed, we always seem to start with an international topic at your since you're running the show, you're the guy who does that. And I am consistently amazed at how you are able to keep up not only with the fact that Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron faced each other in the French elections, but the lower candidates who were eliminated in the early runoffs, and their names, you can pronounce them correctly. I'm just very impressed by you.
Well, that's because I voted for him, Nancy. So. Well, thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I like to kind of go through the funnel, go international, and then come
right,
home.
Exactly.
Because it's always about coming home to Detroit. But thank you for that. Well, I mean, I think this point that you're making is so important about part of the divide that we have is not just red state, blue state, but it's urban versus rural.
Exactly.
And we saw this in France. There was an interesting thing on the BBC where they were reporting from, God forbid, somewhere outside Paris, up near the coast with the English Channel, and they said, "Look, no one comes and talks to us except Le Pen." And the anxieties about polling were, well, the polling was wrong about Brexit. The polling was wrong about Trump. So I guess maybe Le Pen can go ahead and win this. Does the Democratic Party, which used to, it seems, represent rural America at one time in the heartland, are they ever going to get the memo on this? Or have the Republicans now just sort of swept the table about rural areas?
Honestly, I don't know. I think that's a really huge point, because like we're even finding that, Democrats used to be like, Republicans were the ones who were high income and super educated. Now it's flipping, right? And it's totally flipped. Yeah, it's already flipped. And I think there are a lot of people who feel unrepresented right now. I think that's the honest part, because they're like, okay, the Republican Party has gone so far to the right, where you've got people like the attorney general guy who just got nominated. You've got that kind of caliber of person who doesn't represent somebody who's an old school Republican who believes in fiscal conservatism and certain aspects of, is a traditional conservative, right? But at the same time, there are also some Democrats who kind of feel like, look, I'm not concerned with any of the far left stuff. I'm more kind of like, what's going to help put more food on my table, right? What's going to make it so I can make sure my kid goes to college and doesn't have a lot of debt? What's going to make it so that I can put gas in my car without freaking out? It's just it feels like there aren't enough people who are thinking about the basics and meeting people where they are. And that can also help support people to become more extreme. And also for others to feel like, I'm not going to show up. Like you said in France, people are like, this is all stupid. I'm not coming because it doesn't change what my day-to-day life looks like.
Interesting. Charlie LaDuff has a piece today, a column on the convention, the Republican convention. And he talks about really the mix at the party, the country club versus the Elks Club. And we found a great little picture. I did a little screenshot of a video where the My Pillow guy is there shaking hands with a guy with a long ponytail and beard who looks like he just, came from somewhere in the UP. And that is the party that they've been able to capture. And I think some of that is just the anti-liberal thing. They've been able to capture that so well and attract so many people are like, yeah, we hate those libtards, and they've successfully, captured a lot of people that I think way back we would have thought like, oh my gosh, the Republicans have nothing to offer these people, but they see something there.
Hey, it's the Duck Dynasty all over, Steve.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny that you guys bring this up because I've been thinking about this for the last couple of weeks. When I was a kid, we're talking the late 50s and the early 60s, I played baseball in all of those small towns on the way up from here: Gladwin, Standish, Pinconning, Rose City, Mayo, Beaverton. And I was thinking, and we'd play these guys every year, and you couldn't have people from more different backgrounds than what we had. Jewish kids from here around Detroit, and these guys who were Christian kids who were up there. And over the years, we got to know each other. We got to be very friendly. And I honestly wonder just what you guys are talking about. If I went back to Beaverton, A, how many of the guys I played against would still be around there, right? And then B, how do they think these days? Do the guys in Gladwin that we used to hang out with and talk stuff with, would we even be able to have a conversation? I think that's consistent with what you guys are talking about. Everybody's kind of gone. The Republicans have been so, I hate to use the word expert at it, but they've made everything cultural issues, you know.
Right.
Think about it. How can a party with Mitch McConnell as your leader, how can they pretend to be for regular people? I mean, here's a guy who didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Now he's worth $20 million. He's been a politician his entire life. How can those people how can Josh Hawley, how can Ted Cruz, how can those guys pretend that they give 2 shits about a regular person? Because we know they don't care about Beaverton and Gladwin and Standish. They don't care.
A friend of mine did a project for the Detroit News a few years back on these little, it was called Moved Offshore. It was about offshoring. And it was, he pointed out there, a lot of those little towns, Gladwin and Standish and all that, they might have had a small light industrial park or a light industrial factory where you could get a decent job and you could work there your whole career doing something that at some point we learned that it could be done offshore in China or Mexico or Vietnam or wherever for about 10% of the cost, and consequently that's where it went. And free trade used to be a big plank of the Republican Party, and it still is, and it's a plank in the Democratic Party as well. But you take those jobs away, and then with one hand, and with the other hand, you deliver a big platter of steaming bullshit in the form of these culture war issues. Why does a person in Gladwin have to worry about transgender issues affecting their high school sports teams? They don't. The number of transgender athletes in this city or in this state is vanishingly small. But if you talk to some of these people, it's the most important thing that they talk about. So,
because honestly, if you think about it, what does "Make America Great Again" mean?
Yeah, exactly.
What are they saying, right? They're saying we need to go backwards. We need to go back to the time where you didn't have all these other people who were taking away our opportunities, right?
Right.
What Donald Trump did was give voice to that feeling of someone else is to blame for what's happening to you.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Someone else is to blame. So they've now created all these villains, whether it's a transgender athlete, right? Who you've never met, you don't know, but they're the villain. They're the reason why things are bad for you, right? And, I think, again, the party did a really good job of creating that message. The real thing that I think is going to be so fascinating here in Michigan is, will these candidates who espouse so much hate and are anointed by Trump, will they win, right? Like, my gut is no, they're not going to win, right? But crazy stuff has happened. So it'll be really interesting to see who shows up for, the new AG guy and all. And I don't know why I can't remember his name, but
Matt DePerno.
Yeah, that guy. Who shows up for him? It's going to be the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Matt DePerno is going to lose. I think he's got so much baggage going on. He's got like bad publicity going on already within the party even. But it's interesting when Steve mentioned, you talk about the social issues, and everyone's sort of touching on that. I remember, I think it was 2004 when gay marriage became such a big deal, like in West Virginia, where if you've been to West Virginia, when I was in DC, I went there many times. It's a very poor state. It's a the coal mines, there's union workers. I mean, all the stuff that the Republican Party you would think would not be in favor of. And yet they were able to take the gay marriage thing and people saw that as such a threat to the society. And as you say now, Trump with Make America Great is really a message of make America more white and Christian. Let's get back to the basics. That's really almost, and it's funny that people complain about like the Taliban, and their power and Sharia law and stuff like that, and how religion really tries to take over societies in different places. And yet there's so much of that that's attempting to be, happening here. It's like, I had a discussion with one person and she says, we were talking about gay marriage, and she says, well, the Bible says that it's between a man and a woman. And I said, yeah, okay, that's the Bible, but isn't there a separation of church and state here? Are we supposed to base our laws on a Bible? So I don't know.
So Fish, I've got a case for you, actually. All these people now are saying the Talibanization of America. I think if you represented the Taliban for violating the fair use copyright doctrine, you might be able to cash in some money there, pal.
I think I'll have to wait till someone takes a pistol and shoots somebody else, because I only know how to do criminal stuff.
18 USC 1701, fair use doctrine. There you go. So Bill Cycley's chiming in saying, isn't part of the problem a lot easier to be against something rather than support a position? I guess the Democrats need to worry about this as far as running in 2022 as just an anti-Trump party and having something a little bit more proactive.
Did you guys see the column by Mark Penn in the New York Times yesterday? Penn was Clinton's pollster. He kind of disappeared off the face of the earth. And basically it was just a fairly long column on the editorial page criticizing the Democratic Party for all the things that they aren't doing. Basically, he was saying, it seemed to me, we really need to go back to the 1990s and we'll do everything that I told the Clintons to do. He kind of leaves out the fact that Hillary managed to lose to the biggest asshole on the planet. But it was interesting to read. He was claiming, of course, that it was based on polls, kind of like what Alexis was saying earlier. And, all those things are easy to say, but it's not so simple to do, particularly when your president, our Democratic president, is 80. And I go back, I know you guys are sick of me banging that drum, but we've got to have young people involved in this. You're not going to get young people, even young Democrats, to sit around all day long listening to Joe Biden talk. It's just not going to happen. Because he's older than
So basically, we then have two models of Make America Great Again, the 1950s version and the 1990s version.
Right.
Okay. Duly noted. Well, there is rumbling going on in the state of Michigan when it comes to the Republican Party. I mean, we have Tom Daunt, who resigned from the state committee. And then we also have Matt Maddock.
Tony Daunt.
Sorry.
Yes. Okay.
Tony Daunt. T. Daunt.
Yeah.
And we have Matt Maddock, who was booted out of the GOP caucus. What's going on with the GOP? Oh, yeah. And then there's, of course, the other thing about they nominated Christina Caramo as the Secretary of State candidate. So
the GOP is a mess. It's a mess. I mean, not the Democrats have their shit together so much, but the GOP is really a mess, where I think some people are really getting sick and tired of the Trump narrative, about Trump still whining about the 2020 election, and people are starting to put their foot down. And we're seeing such a split in the party there. We have Matt DePerno, who was pushing for it in was Antrim County. He was pushing for the election fraud thing. We have all these crazies that are trying to take over, and there's a pushback now. There's a pushback nationally against, some of the craziest Congress members. The Republican Party's got a lot, and you see Matt, McCartney, who is suddenly, he's dealing with the fallout of what he was trying to be a good leader, and now he's just catching so much grief because he actually wanted to do the right thing.
Kevin McCarthy.
I don't believe that. I don't believe for a minute he wanted to do the right thing. I think there's a great column today that I read. I think it was in the Washington Post that he did like this then too.
Right.
And he thought, this guy's on his way out, so Kevin McCarthy, that brilliant genius, will get in front of that. I don't believe for a minute he thought he ought to do it.
I completely agree. I think we now are at a point where everybody has to, nobody does what they actually, not nobody, I want to say, a lot of these folks don't do what they believe is right. And the sad thing is that we give so much attention to the extremes that we don't listen to the people in the middle who just want stuff to make sense. They are so sick of the whole process. They're so sick of the garbage. They're so sick of all the people talking heads on all sides. You just want to tell them all to shut up and do their job.
That's also primary voters. Who votes in a primary? You know, the hardcore, the hard believers. Right. So it's always like the primary campaign is always to the extreme, and then we end up, you know, coming into they pivot to the middle, as they say in the, you know, to try to pick up those votes that are in the middle. But what's happening in the Michigan Republican Party is similar to what's been happening in the National Republican Party. It's a civil war. And it's a civil war between the country club and the, you know, the corner bar. And it's, you know, the Maddocks are ruthless. I mean, this guy was a bail bondsman. I mean, he certainly knows like nefarious behavior just from direct observation through the course of his career. And, you know, they've been piling up precinct delegates, and and now they've got this recruiting campaign to get candidates for office who are going to support. Matt Maddock wants to be the Speaker of the House in the next term after this election, and he may well get it if he manages to, you know, if these guys he's trying to primary his own colleagues. That's why they booted him out of the caucus. It's apparently considered it's not really a violation of the rules, but it's kind of a violation of the norms. But think of some other people who have violated the norms. You know, it's just that's what he does, and he's banking that he's going to be able to turn out more mouth-breathing red hats than the country club will be able to turn out nice Republicans.
But I think this time, and again, I leave the political stuff to you political people. I just go by what I read. I think that the opposition to the Trumpists, to the DePernos of the world, I mean, in 2 consecutive days, Nolan Finley and Ingrid Jack, hardly fire-breathing liberals, both wrote columns in the Detroit News criticizing what's going on, talking up the fact that the things that we're talking about, that there's a large number of people and they're not going to give them any money. That's what Miss Jacks's column was today. They're not going to give them any money, and they're going to support, I think it sounds like they're going to support those incumbents that are being challenged by the lunatics. So it just seems like Michigan's a little further ahead in terms of that the Republicans, you know, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. That's what it seems like just reading. Again, you guys have more insights because you are smarter than me and you talk to more people too, you know.
Well, what about the idea that Nolan is the editor of an urban-based a major city newspaper? I mean, what about people who are farther afield in Michigan? Do you think they have a better finger on the pulse of the state?
I don't know. I want to hear what Alexis says. She's the politico here.
Well, you know what? I honestly don't know. I'm not a Republican. I don't know who has a better pulse. What's going to tell us is the election. And the only way to stop the whole, you know, Trump being the one who coronates, you know, the king, the queen, for him to keep losing, right? I think whatever happens with AG is going to be huge for Michigan, because if he loses this, when there are so many people who believed that on the Republican side, that Tom Leonard was the guy to beat and could have delivered a solid win. There are a lot of people who are angry. I think that, and I have full belief that Dana Nessa will crush DePerno. I think that's going to be what's going to stop this. I mean, the only thing, because at the end of the day, all this stuff doesn't matter if you don't win. Like, I mean, you don't do that. What are you here for? So I think that's going to be the next step.
Nancy, so go ahead, Alan.
I was just going to say real quick. Trump's goal here in Michigan and elsewhere is really to take over, install a friendly Secretary of State, install a state legislature so that he can overturn what, and carry out his fantasy from the 2020 election was to, overturn. And he needed all the people to be in place, and he's been working on that. And I don't think he's going to succeed, particularly here in Michigan. I think all those people, the state legislature is probably going to remain Republican, but Dana Nessel, the Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, I think she's going to win. They're just a lot of clowns that are being put up, and in the governor's race. Look, there's nobody. James Craig is probably the strongest candidate right now, and he's not that strong.
Nancy, what about Kristina Karamo? I know you've got a few.
Oh, me? Oh, what about Kristina Karamo? Well, she seems to be a religious hysteric, and I mean, there's no other way to put it. And I know that we're all supposed to say, "I deeply respect your deeply held religious views," but in this case, I have no respect for Kristina Karamo's deeply held religious views because they're insane. I posted something on my own Facebook earlier this week about her feelings about yoga. She believes that yoga is demon worship, that you're actually summoning a demon. She thinks that an indigenous dance that's done in other countries is demon worship. This is not conservative Christianity. This is way off the edge of the table on that one. So,
well, that's what we tried to do in the mosh pit at the last ministry show I was at in the university.
Well, and more to the point, Kristina Karamo is not qualified to run a state department as big as the Secretary of State's office. She has no experience in doing anything that I can tell, other than being an instructor at Wayne Community College. Her own website calls her a college professor. It's like, get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. But one of the things I wanted to say before we move on is, do note that in Nolan's column, Steve, it quoted two people in it: Greg McNeely, who is Betsy DeVos's best friend, her sassy gay friend, and David Nicholson. I don't know much about David Nicholson. I know his daughter graduated from high school with my daughter, but that's about it.
He's a big Republican.
I know he's a big Republican. No, I knew that, but I mean, I don't know where he falls on the MAGA spectrum. I assume he seems to be sane. His family is very nice, so I'm going to assume that he's more of a Betsy DeVos. And then Tony Daunt was quoted in Ingrid Jacques' column, and he was the second in command to Greg McNeely when he was running the Michigan Freedom Fund, and now runs it himself. So he is also definitely on Betsy's Christmas card list. Betsy DeVos served in the Trump administration until, as I recall, like January 7th. I mean, she was one of the people who said, I'm disgusted with this and I'm out of here, and resigned a few days before the inauguration. I mean, why isn't anybody pointing out, that this is like the estrangement of a person who managed to stick with Trumpism for 4 years and now has decided, and she's richer than Trump. I don't care what anybody says. The DeVosses have more money and more suction certainly in Michigan than the Trump organization ever will.
And less bankruptcies.
Well, I had an interesting post on my Facebook feed yesterday, and it was a webinar on education reform with Betsy DeVos and Ron DeSantis, everybody's favorite Florida governor. Right. So it looks like she's certainly tacking a little bit and hedging her bets maybe for another cabinet position in 24. But I do have to say one thing, though, Nancy, is that don't knock bail bondsmen. After all, Chico's bail bonds were the ones that sponsor the Bad News Bears.
Okay.
and Detroit had a legendary, I don't know if he's still Chucky Goldfarb. Is he still around, or?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
He was a classic. I had lunch with him once. He's a great guy. He was married to a judge, but
did he pay in cash or just 10% down?
That's a good question. I can't remember.
Well, it seems like the Republicans are going to have a little bit more of a difficulty, not necessarily just winning elections in Michigan, but even getting on the ballot. Looks like the state board is investigating 3 different GOP candidates, including former police chief here in Detroit, James Craig, but also Tudor Dixon, and everybody's favorite geriatric-looking Clay Aiken, Perry Johnson. Is it going to stick with any of them?
Go ahead.
I listened to another podcast this morning, which I will not mention, while I was lifting weights in my prison gym, i.e., my basement. And I think that it was when Mark Brewer was talking, and the former head of the Democratic Party, and from what he was describing, it sounds like James Craig may well be toast. Tudor Dixon may get a slide by because her error was, I think they said for the term that runs from 2022 to 2026, but technically the gubernatorial term ends on January 1, 2027, that she might get a pass on that. And as far as Perry Johnson goes, I'm not so sure about that. But according to Brewer, who's done this more times than any of us together, he said Craig's petitions are a mess, and they're a mess. He said they are he said they're some of the worst I've ever seen. So if you take him at his word and maybe subtract a little for exaggeration, it sounds like that it might be like the final. We may be seeing James Craig back at the bar at Sinbad's before too much longer. So.
I think he's been there. I don't think he.
No, he hangs there. That's his hang. It's right. He lives right by there. So,
well, Alexis,
I've seen him there many times.
You have been involved in campaigns.
Yeah.
How scary is it when you sort of rely on people to go collect the signatures? What's happening out there? You're paying people.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge piece of what you do. I mean, if you don't get on the ballot, so what we always did was like, and in every campaign, you just make sure that like you have somebody who's like the smartest person around overseeing what's going on with signatures, and you actually have your own legal counsel who checks your signatures, which is why you typically get way more than you're supposed to, and you periodically check them to make sure that you're on the right path, right? And you have attorneys who do that. Right. If that was not what happened here, he very well could be in this situation. And I worked with the chief. I have a lot of respect personally for the chief. And I see him at Sinbad's often, and he's a kind of a neighbor, right? But I think that if that didn't happen, you got to kind of ask the question of what's happening in terms of the management of the campaign, and really manage. Like, I just think these are silly. These are mistakes that just you can't ignore. And if he gets thrown off,
are these rookie? Are they rookie? Is this a rookie mistake, or does it happen to anybody at whenever they're running?
It sounds like he delegated.
Oh, if you're not managing, yeah. So
it sounds from the discussion this morning that I listened to, it sounds like he delegated this task to he did not pick the smartest person around to oversee it, as Alexis advises. And he delegated it to he's had some really shitty staff. I mean, he had Brandon Hall working for him, the guy who actually has committed voter fraud. So he was involved in his own signature shenanigans some years back. So, it sounds like he was a political novice, and that's fine as long as you hire seasoned pros to kind of run things for you. And he didn't hire enough seasoned pros. And now, of course, he's lost the endorsement of the up north guy, Jack Bergman. So, I mean, it's really been, shall we say, a star-crossed campaign for James Craig.
But I mean, to invoke and paraphrase Oscar Wilde here, I mean, to have one person with a ballot petition signature issue would be seen as a misfortune. 2 would be seen as reckless. 3 would be seen as a pathology.
Well, let me kind of. I mean, the only thing I would say in defense of that, ballot issues are common, right? They happen in every race. There's always candidates with little issues. I mean, something big like you have dead people having signed, like that is an extreme, right? There's always somebody who's going to challenge, like, did you pay your fees on time? Did you and then that's why there's a gray area in terms of what actually will get you kicked off the ballot. It sounds like what the chief is the one who's really dealing with being like straight up kicked off if indeed you have dead people and you don't hit the threshold.
Yeah, true. Perry Johnson's problem, I think, was just that he was such a late entry. That's the other thing. I mean, that was the other thing that was stressed today, is that it's people act like 15,000 legit signatures is easy to get. It's not easy to get. It's, because people sign Mickey Mouse. They, the signature collector decides to take off early. I mean, there are a million things that can go wrong in collecting 15,000 signatures. And if you don't give yourself as much time as possible, and as Alexis said, put the smartest person in the room in charge of it, you can easily end up being tripped up by that. And so
why Nancy, are you suggesting a road trip down to Florida where we all sign DeSantis's petitions with Mickey Mouse? Because
well, look what's happening to the Unlock Michigan people. I mean, that looked like a steamroller. That was going to go all the way. And they have apparently screwed around, and now they've expired they have so many days to collect their signatures, and they've exceeded that number of days, which means everything that came before this is that how it works, Alexis? Everything that came before is invalidated, or do they just have to? I'm not
sure the mechanics, but
yeah,
Mark,
I'm not sure. But the point
guy for you guys to ask some of these things too, because he is the expert, and really like Mark Brewer.
Oh, Brewer, yeah.
So respected. The fact that he's saying all this, it's got to be taken seriously.
We should have him on the show. So.
He's
got that in his voice. He's got this really raspy voice. He's like always. He's a good, and he's very smart too. So.
Right.
So names do matter, and we just have now the release of the name of the police officer involved in the killing of Patrick Lyoya in Grand Rapids. It's Officer Chris Shore. How are things looking in this case? I know it's now in the hands of the Grand Rapids prosecutor. Do you see charges imminent or pending at all?
Steve Fishman.
I don't see a way on the planet that they can avoid charging him. I've watched that video 3 or 4 times, and every time it gets to the part where he shoots him in the back of the head, even someone like me, with my background, with the number of cases I've had, the number of police officers I've represented in homicides, it shakes me every time. I don't know. They'll charge him. They'll probably charge him with murder too. That's my guess, because there are 3 prongs of murder too, and he certainly qualifies as to the 3rd one. But as I've said on this show many, many, many times, what we really need, we need a review by the local police departments and by the cities or towns that they represent as to why in the hell it is that you're sending your officers out there. Number 1, sending them by themselves, which is foolishness of the highest order. Number 2, you're having them stop people, try to arrest people for something as ridiculous as driving with a fucked up license plate. And 3, why it is that everybody, not everybody, too many police officers make it personal. The guy won't stop. God damn it, I'm going to get him. The guy still won't. He's still resisting. I can't imagine what the officer was thinking that caused him to shoot him. I mean, banging him over the head with the pistol, okay, that'd be one thing. But I mean, shooting the guy in the back of the head because he fled and his license plate was screwed up, that to me is something that no prosecutor's office can ignore. I think that the things that have come out about the deceased, I mean, those are all things, but that doesn't change anything really in terms of what happened on that day. A lot of people run from the police. Sometimes they do it because they don't feel like going to jail that day. What would have happened to him because he had warrants outstanding. But none of that justifies shooting a guy in the back of the head. So I say this every time, and I'm 73, so I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime, but we need a serious conversation in these cities and towns as to what you want your police officers to do. Are they there to serve the population, or are they there as an occupying force? And I think that the Detroit police, this is my opinion, I think the Detroit police do a pretty damn good job of not getting in situations like what we saw on that video. And I compliment the chiefs. I think Chief Craig did a good job on that. And I think our present chief is doing that. You just can't be in a position as a police officer working by himself or herself to be sitting on top of somebody and then you pull out a gun and shoot him in the back of the head. I mean, the video speaks for itself. You almost don't need, I tell you guys this all the time.
Can I play the video real quick?
Sure.
Pull a taser.
No, he ain't brought no taser. I see that.
Let go of the taser. Drop taser!
Ugh,
How do
awful.
people not just shoot the hand that's holding the taser? I mean, that seems like it would disarm someone.
It's not that. It's not that side. It's the whole. I'm telling you, and any police officers will tell you, experienced Detroit police officers who have stuff like that every day. They have the opportunity to pull something like that every day. There's young guys running around out there. They got the wrong license or no license, and they don't wind up on top of them, shooting them in the back of the head. It's not. It should never get to that point. That's the whole issue. It should never get to the point where you have to decide while you're on top of a guy who you're after for having a screwed up license plate.
Right.
It's just a very difficult situation.
This was an unarmed man
Right.
who was stopped in a traffic stop. A traffic stop should not mean you die.
Mhm.
I don't care what you like. Literally, you didn't. If a traffic stop should not mean that you die.
Right.
And that's where we are in this country, is really like, how do we transform policing? How do we ensure that you are, I mean, there's gotta be just, I mean, and it's not even like, I don't know the full solution, but I know that we can't have that, because if it's just,
It's interesting. You see this video, which is just, I mean, we're all, it's every time you see it, you're still horrified by it, no matter how many times you see it. And how is this, and, you know, the George Floyd video, how are those not being used in an instructive way? And yet there's still gonna be another incident. There's still, it's like, it's still mind boggling that these things are happening, that this training is, I mean, we've talked about this before, where a guy pulls him over, he starts to run. Okay, get on the radio, call for help, tow the car, do whatever, you know, go get him later. It's only a traffic stop. And yet we're going to see it again. And the question is, it's baffling why every time, why we keep seeing it.
Yeah, I'm telling you the answer. The answer is because people keep focusing on the training at a police academy. People get trained at the police academy, but every situation is different. And unless your department, as I think it is in Detroit, unless there are policies and training manuals and instruction, not just at the academy, but when you're a young officer and you're riding with a more experienced officer, the more experienced officer is going to say to the young officer, there, that guy's license plate is screwed up. Let's see if he comes, but we're not going to get into a situation like we have here. You've got to decide. Look at Eric Garner got killed because he was selling cigarettes, individual. Think about that. Police officers going over there to screw around about cigarettes. George Floyd, at worst, passed a phony 20. How do you wind up with someone sitting on top of him, strangling him to death for a phony 20? It comes from the top, from the departments, and more so from the mayors or the chief executives of the cities or towns where these police departments are. That's the key.
and I think the importance of trying to actually, I think that when it comes to policing, diversity matters, because I think there is a difference in whether, when I approach, when you see somebody who is, let's say, you know, selling a Lucy, right? Loose cigarette. If I see you as my neighbor, if I see you as my cousin, if I can relate to you, I might treat you a little differently. But if I view you with all of my baggage, all of the background that you've got, all your biases, and I treat you in a certain way, you start from an end where, like, you can't win. You can't win. And we got to figure out how we, you know, have a holistic conversation about policing. The answer is not defund the police, because at the end of the day, we need police. We need to keep communities safe, but we also need to invest in a force that that is serving everyone equally and respectfully. That should be the goal.
Right.
So on the issue of messaging there, Alexis, we do have, of course, now the arguably the biggest platform of messaging, which is Twitter, having been purchased by none other than Elon Musk for $44 billion. Looks like he got his financing, except that Tesla lost about $105 billion in its market value the very next day. So there is a God. Where do you see this going when it comes to discussions and debates about free speech, about oligarchs owning the media? Not that he's the first. I guess there's that Murdoch guy and a few others like Bezos. Does it really change the formula, or are we just simply worried that now he's going to let Trump back on?
Let's say, I mean, to be honest, I actually think you bring up the point. Rich people have owned papers and publications forever. They started them, right? And some were deeply involved in them. Why is this any different? And why are people like, I mean, people are freaking out about it. And like Twitter, I honestly think Twitter is, I'm like not a Twitter fan anyhow. I think it's a dark place. So, you know, I mean, to be honest, I really don't like it. People just are constantly like angry, and it's literally about like, let's spout what we think and, you know, keep dividing us. Like, I just think it's so lame, and I'm so over it. Like, you see, like, I rarely tweet anymore because I just think it's like, I get anxiety reading through my timeline, because it's always like somebody's mad about this, somebody's mad about that. I'd rather go to Instagram and post a picture of a cat or a kid.
An angry cat?
Happy, grumpy cat, whatever. I want to hear what people think, because I just don't. I'm so over people. So I was the wrong one to ask that question. I went down a very
so Musk is clearly no Catherine Graham, but I mean, is he a William Randolph Hearst?
I think
no.
You know what?
He's a shit stirrer. He's an ADHD afflicted, perhaps drug abusing, unserious shit stirrer, and I don't see anything good coming out of him owning Twitter. But you know, it's his. He can do what he wants with it, and you know, maybe it'll turn out to be like Truth Social or any of the other like half-assed, immediately failing right-wing social networks out there that sprung up to combat the shadow banning of people on Twitter. So, you know, I mean, I like Twitter. I'm unlike Alexis. I let a lot of that stuff just roll off. Although I'm always amazed at the things that people find to be pissed about. I mean, you know, God, it's crazy. It's like, let it go. But at the same time, I think that if he lets Trump back on and all the Nazis that have been kicked off, then, you know, they're going to do what Nazi trolls and Donald Trump do, which is, you know, abuse people. And if they abuse enough people, those people are going to leave Twitter. They're going to be followed by decent people. And eventually you're going to end up with Truth Social, which is apparently just an echo chamber of people saying, you know, look at me. It's like listening to a bunch of Canada geese honk at each other. So
I think if he increases it to a 420 characters from 280, I might jump in.
Can I ask a question? I'm going to ask a question for all of you. Right. This is for somebody who still has a flip phone. This is for somebody who doesn't know a Twitter from a tweet. Why in the hell does anybody participate in that shit? What's the matter with calling somebody on the telephone and talking to them? Why do people get on this tweetering, whatever the hell it is? Why do they do it? That's what I want to know.
For a journalist,
because reach out and touch someone now sounds really pervy, Steve.
No more Diana Ross. Okay.
For a journalist, it serves as kind of a form of a wire service. And I mean, when I was working in a newsroom, I used to love to just kind of, you know, call up the AP wire and surf it and see what's going on. Well, now all journalists seem to be on Twitter. They post their stories immediately. For something like last Saturday's GOP convention in Grand Rapids, it was like you are there stuff. You know, you could watch things as they were happening. So that's what I get out of it. And occasionally frustrated, and sometimes I just have to turn it off.
What about non-journalists? What do they get out of it other than to vent a bunch of crap?
Some people, I mean, it's what anybody gets out of the internet. Yeah, I mean,
athletes use it. I mean, when Cabrera got his 3,000 hit, a lot of the athletes were going on there and congratulating him and stuff like that. Justin Verlander's got a huge following. People look, it's a way of being published. It's a way of having for so long the media had control over whose voice got in a story, who got a letter to the editor, And now it's like the Wild West out there. And there's so much misinformation out there. There's so much crazy stuff. And I was going to say, Elon Musk talks about free speech, and he's like, but in China, he was trying to get the government to suppress criticism of his company. The guy is full of shit. And I think it's scary. He's the wrong. I mean, look, there are some people with a lot of money who could do a lot of good, and I'm not sure he's the one who's going to do it.
Well, and remember when he put out that tweet because he was mad at Bernie Sanders for coming after him, and he said, "You're still alive."
Yeah.
Right.
Not yet. I mean, that was his tweet to Bernie Sanders. It was like that's just like not nice. Like he's just kind of a jerk.
Right.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, some of us who still value the Queen's English, I think, tend to be a little bit salty about how it's reduced the level of discourse. But hey, what do I know? I live in a big city. So there you go. Alan, I think we're going to our next phase here.
All right, here we go.
After a thorough examination, I have concluded not only are you ugly, you're a schmuck.
And I know, Alexis, that you're not fond of the word, so we will let you use the pejorative of your choice, tool, whatever you want.
Putz. She's a little more comfortable with
That's
putz.
my word, putz.
Okay.
I
You chose putz. So we're staying with the tribe. Okay, very good. Alexis, who's your putz?
Let me be last. I need a little. You know, I had a great week this week. I'm not really mad at anybody. I don't feel like anybody's done anything. It's all going well. It's been really exceptional. I got to think.
We will invoke the Alexis Pollyanna rule if you'd like, that you can defer your putts to someone else to do more than one if you'd like.
I love that. I love that. Who wants to take my putts?
All right. I don't need your putts.
That phraseology is.
And I have to ask the Yiddish speakers here, Alan and Steve, isn't a putz and a schmuck the same thing?
Pretty much. It's
Pretty
just a harsher word.
Putz is a softer kind of schmuck.
Okay.
What we find to be fascinating, people like Lengo and I, is how many times Gentiles love to use Yiddish, even when they don't have a clue as to what it is that the word means when they say it, and even when they can't pronounce it. But they love to. Well, isn't this? I'm going to kibitz with you today. That's for sure.
It's a great language. It's got
anyway, back to schmuck of the week.
So that means that the difference between putz and schmuck isn't just a game of inches.
It could be.
It's got a great expressiveness to it.
Okay.
It's because so much of it comes out of the throat.
Yeah. All Steve, why don't you start it off then?
I have a couple for the putz / schmucks of the week, and it is in fact Mr. Matt Maddock and his wife Michonne Maddock, and we already kind of talked about why they're it. The fact that they have been able, and their trolls that are with them, that they've been able to tick off people like Nolan Finley and Ingrid Jacks and some of these other folk we've been talking about. Think about it. You got to get up early in the morning. You have to really be off the wall as a so-called Republican and a so-called conservative to tick off the people they've ticked off. So to me, that makes them both schmucks and putzes, and they're my pick for the schmuck and putz of the week.
Fair enough. All right, Nancy.
Well, the Maddocks were on my list, but I always have a backup schmuck, and I'm going with Lana Tice, who is the state rep who
that's a good one.
Tried to shame Mallory McMorrow and got it thrown back in her face so eloquently by Senator McMorrow, but not for that. I was listening to another podcast. I'm kind of big on podcasts this week, and I heard her talking about she's trying to push some of this some version of the Don't Say Gay bill here in Michigan, and she actually got teary talking about the books that were available in our school libraries that children could read, and blah blah blah. And she mentioned, I think, Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye, which and let me just say, a right-wing state senator from Howell going up against a Nobel literature laureate is kind of funny in a lot of ways. Toni Morrison, of course, won the Nobel Prize. But then she also mentioned another couple books, and it was the crocodile tears that she was shedding over the thought that her children might read these things, that puts her in my crosshairs this week. So Lana Tice.
That was a stunningly accurate imitation there, Nancy.
It's funny. A friend of mine, Petula Dvorak, who's sort of my pod there at the Washington Post, she wrote a column talking about all the banning of books, and she said, "How about banning bullets? How about the parents are so concerned about the harm these books. Well, meanwhile, there's mass shootings at these schools.
Sure.
It's like, let's get a little balance here."
Yeah.
Okay, Alan.
I'm going to go with Carrie Lake, a former TV reporter in Arizona, who's now one of the Republican candidates for governor. She this week was railing about all these drugs or COVID drugs that should be over the counter, and that Dr. Fauci has prevented us from getting that. And she says, I know it's not going to happen in Maricopa County, but I think a sheriff in Arizona could put out an arrest warrant for Dr. Fauci and arrest him. And so, the idiocy of these candidates, it's amazing. I mean, the upside is they're bringing down the Republican Party. I mean, they're sabotaging them in so many ways.
They're all
Arpaio again, or
yeah.
In my adult lifetime, we have moved from Republicans talking about jackbooted thugs to them saying, "Hey, bring on some jackbooted thugs." So you really have to appreciate that. So.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want to make America great again to a time when the Republicans weren't doing what they are now, are you, Nancy?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Alexis, I'm going to give you a choice for your proxy. Do you want an airline passenger or a politician?
Airline passenger.
You got it. Okay, for you, this is Alexis's proxy or vicarious putz of the week. Is Christopher Alexander Morgan, the belligerent first-class Delta passenger flying from Atlanta to Phoenix, who then rails against a flight attendant who refused to serve him more alcohol, called the flight attendant by an anti-gay slur, hurled objects, including but not limited to a glass of ice and the phone that was being used by said flight attendant to alert the cockpit that they had a belligerent passenger in first class. He wouldn't put his seat all the way or bring his seat up. He had it reclined all the way, and he wouldn't buckle in either. So, Christopher Alexander Morgan, you are Alexis's proxy schmuck of the week.
I thought that's why they have on the planes those emergency exits, so you can get
right. Give him a parachute.
I read a David Sedaris essay where he talks to a flight attendant who claims that when that happens, when they have a really obnoxious passenger, they like to walk past his seat and fart, and they call it crop dusting.
Wow.
Bring Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson will take care of it.
Yeah.
Right.
That can be a permanent mask mandate requirement right there. So, okay. So my schmucks of the week are the American family that caused havoc at Israel's Ben Gurion Airport. Apparently, as tourists to Israel, they decided to take a trek up to the Golan Heights, where they found an unexploded shell. And they decided that they were going to bring this home as a souvenir. They go through and declare it, at least they declared it, to airport security at the luggage drop-off, which caused an absolute shutdown of the airport and panic ensued. One person was injured when he fell over the baggage conveyor belts. But apparently, he is going to recover from that. I'm still wondering if he's on the carousel itself. After being interrogated and cleared by security, they were, in fact, allowed to board the flight back home to the United States. But for wreaking havoc and causing chaos and being able to get farther with some kind of munition than I could get with, I don't know, a straw at the airport, you are my schmucks of the week.
The Shonda.
How big is an unexploded shell? How big is an unexploded shell that you would find?
It was this big.
Jesus. Wow. Okay.
Thank you.
That person is now running for governor in Texas.
But yes, Shonda it is. Anyways, thank you again for a wonderful conversation, Alexis Wiley, Steve Fishman, Nancy Derringer, and of course, always our last word to Alan Lengel.
Drive home safely.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.